So, what if I told you that one of the absolute biggest musical groups of the 70s and 80s wasn't really a band at all? I mean, these guys sold millions of albums. They created one of the most legendary stadium anthems of all time, and they pretty much defined a whole era of sound, all without ever really touring or even having a steady lead singer. It's an incredible story, so let's get into it.
You know this sound. You just do. Close your eyes and picture it. It's Chicago in the 90s. The stadium lights go down, the air is just buzzing with energy, and then that pulsing, unforgettable instrumental kicks in. It meant one thing. Michael Jordan and the Bulls were about to hit the court. It is, without a doubt, one of the most iconic pieces of sports music ever. But where on earth did it come from?
Well, get this. That track was made by a British progressive rock group that almost never played a live show. It was basically run by a sound engineer, just tinkering away in a studio. This was not your normal rock band. They were a total enigma, an experiment that just completely shattered all the rules. Yeah, that legendary Chicago Bulls theme, it's a track called Sirius. And the story behind it, well, it pulls back the curtain on one of the most unique and innovative creative partnerships in the history of music. And this is the story of that so-called group, the Alan Parsons Project. It's a name that didn't stand for a band in the traditional sense, but for a totally radical new way of making music. To really wrap your head around the project, you first have to understand the architect behind it all, the man whose name is right there in the title, Alan Parsons. And his story kicks off at, just the most legendary recording studio on the entire planet. I mean, just look at this timeline. It's like a highlight reel of rock and roll history. Parsons lands a job at Abbey Road Studios when he's only 19. A few years later, he's the assistant engineer on the final Beatles albums, and then he becomes the lead engineer for one of the biggest, most mind-bending albums ever recorded. Talk about a meteoric rise, right? Now, what's so amazing about this is just how revolutionary his work was on Pink Floyd's The Dark Side of the Moon. He wasn't just sitting there pressing record. No way. He was basically sculpting sound, crafting this entire atmosphere, a whole sonic world you could get lost in. That album alone made Alan Parsons an absolute superstar behind the mixing board. And Parsons himself knew just how huge this moment was. He said, quote, "It set my career path. It was a very important album and I'm proud of it." You better believe the entire music industry was suddenly paying very close attention to this young engineering genius. So his reputation is just soaring. He's at the top of his game, and right at this peak, Parsons has this one chance meeting that is going to change everything and lead to a completely new way of thinking about what a rock album could even be. And where did this life-changing meeting happen? Of all places, the Abbey Road Canteen. It's 1974, and he runs into a guy named Eric Woolfson, a really talented songwriter and pianist who would become not just his manager, but his creative other half. And Woolfson, well, he had this totally wild idea. He was looking over at the film industry and seeing how directors like Hitchcock and Kubrick were the real stars. They were the visionaries. And he thought, hey, why can't a music producer do the same thing? Why not treat an album like it's a movie, where the producer is the director, guiding the whole vision and casting different singers for different roles? This chart just lays it out perfectly. I mean, think about it. Your typical rock band has its set members, they go on these exhausting tours, they've got that famous frontman. The Alan Parsons Project threw all that out the window. It was just Parsons and Woolfson at the core, a studio-only creation, no tours, and a rotating cast of vocalists handpicked for the perfect voice for each specific song. It was the anti-band. So with this completely unique formula locked in, they basically entered their golden age. They became the absolute masters of the concept album, telling these huge, sweeping, cinematic stories, but with music. And their process was just genius. They had this playbook they followed every single time. First, they'd pick some huge theme, anything from the dark stories of Edgar Allan Poe to sci-fi concepts about AI. Then Parsons and Woolfson would write the whole thing. They'd bring in this core group of incredible session musicians to keep the sound tight, and then, like a film director, they'd cast the perfect singer for each part. So what did all that sound like? Well, it was this incredible blend. You had the big ambition of progressive rock, the wild creativity of art rock, but, and this is the secret sauce, they mixed it all with these super smooth soft rock melodies and pop hooks. Their music could be unbelievably complex, but at the same time so catchy you couldn't get it out of your head. And the results? They were just staggering. We're talking a whole string of hit, platinum-selling records. From their very first album based on Edgar Allan Poe to huge commercial hits like I, Robot and Eye in the Sky, each one was its own complete world. There was no denying it. These guys were a force. But like any great story, it wasn't always sunshine and platinum records. There were some serious bumps in the road, including a really intense contract dispute that led to one of the most mysterious and legendary lost albums in all of rock music. Okay, so picture this. The year is 1979. They're locked in these super tense contract talks with their record label, Arista. They need some kind of leverage, a bargaining chip. So they cook up this really bold plan to deliver their next album in a way the label would never, ever see coming. They decided to call the album the Sicilian Defence. Now, if you know anything about chess, that's a really aggressive, tactical opening move. And that's exactly what this was, a power play. Parsons himself later kind of laughed it off, calling it a throwaway, and even saying he hoped the master tapes were gone forever. They recorded this entire, challenging, completely instrumental album in just 3 days. 3 days. Can you imagine? All just to fulfill their contract and basically force the label's hand. And just like they thought, the label hated it and rejected it. But here's the thing. The gambit totally worked. They got the new deal they wanted. And that weird little album they made in 3 days, it was locked away in a vault. It became the stuff of rock and roll legend, the secret lost album that no one was ever supposed to hear, until it was finally released 35 years later. After 1990, it was really the end of an era. Parsons and Woolfson went their separate ways. But the music they created together, it took on a life completely its own, proving that a legacy isn't always built up on a stage. Which brings us right back to where we started, to Sirius. It became the electrifying theme for the Chicago Bulls dynasty. It was the walk-on music for the New Orleans Saints when they went to the Super Bowl. It's been in movies, in commercials, at soccer matches, it's everywhere. Their music didn't just fade away, it became part of our culture. The Alan Parsons Project is the ultimate proof that a legacy isn't always built in front of a giant, screaming crowd. Sometimes it's built quietly, in a studio, etched into the grooves of a record. So what does a story like this teach us? I think maybe it's that genius isn't always about being in the spotlight. Sometimes it's about having the quiet vision to create a world that's entirely your own.